On the rooftop of a glass tower in Seattle, CEO Chloe Kensington stood minutes away from losing the biggest contract of her life. No pilot, no backup, no time. Then a black man in a janitor's uniform stepped forward, mop still in hand, and said he could fly. Laughter erupted across the helipad. Chloe looked him up and down, then let out a mocking line that would haunt her for months. "Fly this helicopter, and I'll marry you." But nobody there knew they had just insulted a man carrying a secret powerful enough to silence them all. Who was he, really? The morning started the way most mornings did for Chloe Kensington. She arrived at her corner office on the 42nd floor before sunrise, heels clicking against polished marble, already on her second espresso. The skyline of Seattle stretched out before her through floor-to-ceiling windows, but she barely glanced at it. Her mind was locked on the board meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock and the topic that would dominate the conversation: SkyTech. The contract with SkyTech was worth $50 million. It was the kind of deal that would cement her legacy as the youngest CEO to ever lead Kensington Corporation into the tech consulting stratosphere. But it was also the kind of deal that required perfection. No delays, no mistakes, no room for anything less than flawless execution. She had spent 6 months negotiating terms, and today was the day they would finalize everything. The signing was set for 5 o'clock that evening at SkyTech's headquarters across the city. A helicopter would take her there. Fast, efficient, impressive. Chloe walked through the lobby just after 8, her assistant trailing behind her with a tablet full of reminders. She passed the cleaning crew without a second glance. One of them, a black man in a dark blue uniform, was mopping the entryway near the elevator bank. He stepped aside as she approached, his movements smooth and unobtrusive. She didn't acknowledge him. She never did. To her, he was part of the building's infrastructure, as invisible as the air conditioning or the security cameras. Marcus, the night security guard who had worked at Kensington Tower for nearly a decade, gave the janitor a respectful nod as he passed, but Chloe didn't notice that either. His name was Liam Walker, though Chloe didn't know that. She had never asked. Liam had worked the night shift at Kensington Corporation for almost 2 years. And in all that time, he had perfected the art of being unseen. It wasn't difficult. People like Chloe didn't look at people like him. They looked through him, and that was fine. He preferred it that way. That morning, before his shift ended, Liam had done what he did every morning. He drove across town to a small elementary school and waited in the drop-off line with his son strapped into the back seat. Finn was 5 years old, bright-eyed and full of questions that never seemed to stop. He had his mother's eyes, though Liam tried not to think about that too much. She had been gone for 5 years now, taken from them in the moment she gave Finn life. The grief had dulled into something he could carry without collapsing. Mostly. Finn had looked up at him in the rearview mirror that morning and asked the question he asked at least once a week. "Daddy, why do you clean floors?" His voice was small and curious, not judgmental, just wondering. Liam had smiled at him, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but was warm enough to satisfy a 5-year-old. "Because it lets me pick you up from school every day, buddy." And that was the truth. The night shift paid enough to keep them fed and housed, and it meant he could be there when Finn needed him. That was all that mattered. After drop-off, Liam had driven back to his small apartment on the east side of the city. He had 2 hours before he needed to sleep, so he used the time to make Finn's lunch for the next day and fold the laundry that had been sitting in the basket for 3 days. On the kitchen counter, next to the coffee pot, was a framed photo. It showed a younger version of Liam in a military dress uniform, holding a tiny baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Just the two of them. That photo was the only thing in the apartment that hinted at who he used to be. Everything else, the medals and the commendations and the flight logs, was packed away in a box at the back of his closet. He didn't need reminders. He had made his choice, and he didn't regret it. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Chloe's carefully constructed plan began to unravel. She was in the middle of a conference call when her assistant knocked on the door, face pale and apologetic. Chloe muted the call and looked up, irritation flickering across her features. "What is it?" Her assistant hesitated, then spoke quickly. "The pilot. He was in a car accident on the way here. He's okay, but he can't fly. He's at the hospital." Chloe felt her stomach drop. She stood up, the phone still in her hand. "What about the backup?" Her assistant shook her head. "He's in Portland. He can't get here in time." Chloe looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:15. The signing was at 5. The flight to Skitek's helipad took 20 minutes, maybe less in good conditions. That left just over an hour to find someone who could fly a Bell 407 helicopter across the city without killing her in the process. She ended the conference call without explanation and walked out of her office, her assistant scrambling to keep up. The executive team was already gathering in the hallway, phones pressed to their ears, voices tense and overlapping. Davis, the marketing director, was pacing near the elevators, his tie loosened and his expression grim. Rebecca, the CFO, was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, shaking her head at whoever was on the other end of her call. Nobody had an answer. Nobody had a solution. By 4:15, Chloe was standing on the rooftop helipad, staring at the helicopter like it was mocking her. The sun was bright and unforgiving, the wind sharp enough to sting her eyes. Her team stood in a loose circle around her, all of them silent now. They had exhausted every option. Every pilot in the city was either unavailable or unreachable. The deal was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. That was when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Liam walking across the rooftop. His uniform still damp from cleaning the glass doors near the helipad entrance. He was holding a mop in one hand, and for a moment, Chloe thought he was just passing through. But he stopped a few feet away from her and looked at the helicopter, then at her. His voice was even and quiet. "Ma'am, I can fly it." The words hung in the air for a beat too long. Then Davis let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "The janitor? Are you serious right now?" Rebecca turned to look at Liam, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and pity. "Chloe, we can't risk a $50 million deal on this." She gestured vaguely at Liam, as if the gesture alone explained everything. Chloe looked at him. She took in the worn uniform, the calloused hands, the quiet confidence in his posture that didn't match anything else about him. Her first instinct was to dismiss him outright. This was absurd. This was desperation dressed up as a solution. But desperation was all she had left, and the clock was still ticking. She let out a breath that sounded more like a scoff. "You? Fly a Bell 407? Her tone was sharp, edged with sarcasm and frustration. She looked him up and down, then said the words that would replay in her mind for months. "Sure. Fly this helicopter, and I'll marry you." Laughter rippled through the small group on the rooftop. Davis shook his head, grinning like he had just heard the punchline to a bad joke. Rebecca muttered something under her breath about liability. But Liam didn't react. He didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't defend himself. He just looked at Chloe with steady eyes and said, "I just need your permission to start the engine." "Ma'am." Chloe felt something twist in her chest, something uncomfortable and foreign. She didn't know if it was anger or shame, or just the weight of everything collapsing at once. She waved a hand toward the helicopter, her voice tight. "Fine, but when you crash us, it's on you." She climbed into the passenger seat, her hands gripping the edge of the doorframe hard enough to hurt. Her heart was pounding, and she wasn't sure if it was fear or fury, or something else entirely. Liam set the mop down carefully against the rooftop railing, then walked to the helicopter and climbed into the pilot's seat. He moved with a kind of quiet efficiency that made Chloe's stomach tighten. His hands went to the controls without hesitation, flipping switches and checking gauges with the kind of precision that didn't come from luck or YouTube tutorials. She watched him, her breath shallow, as he ran through a pre-flight check that looked like it had been drilled into him 1,000 times before. The engine roared to life, and the rotor blades began to turn. Chloe's knuckles were white against her lap. She didn't pray often, but she was praying now. Praying that this wasn't a mistake. Praying that she would live long enough to regret it. The helicopter lifted off the helipad, smooth and controlled, and Seattle dropped away beneath them. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't beginner's luck. This was something else entirely. The helicopter climbed smoothly into the late afternoon sky, and Chloe realized she was holding her breath. The takeoff had been seamless, so controlled it felt almost gentle. She had expected jerking movements, hesitation, maybe even a moment where the aircraft dipped or swayed. But there was none of that. Liam's hands moved over the controls with a kind of quiet authority that made her stomach twist in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. She watched him from the corner of her eye, trying to reconcile the man in the janitor's uniform with the pilot who was navigating Seattle airspace like he had been doing it his entire life. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, his posture straight and disciplined. The headset he wore made him look official, almost military, and that thought sent a strange chill through her chest. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he sat, or the way his fingers adjusted the cyclic with the smallest, most precise movements. This wasn't someone who had taken a few flying lessons on the weekends. This was someone who had lived in the cockpit, someone who knew the machine like it was an extension of his own body. Chloe forced herself to look away, to focus on the city below. The glass towers of downtown Seattle glittered in the sunlight, and the sound of the rotor blades filled the cabin with a low, rhythmic hum. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to convince herself that this was fine, that everything was under control. But her hands were still clenched in her lap, and her heart was still hammering against her ribs. She hated this feeling. She hated not being in control. And she hated that she had put herself in this position, trusting a man she didn't know, a man she had mocked just minutes earlier. After a few minutes, she found her voice. It came out shakier than she intended. "Where did you learn to fly?" Liam didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the skyline ahead, and for a moment, she thought he might not answer at all. Then he said quietly, "Long time ago, ma'am." His tone was polite but distant, like he was answering a question he had been asked too many times before. Chloe frowned. That wasn't an answer. That was a deflection. But she didn't push. Not yet. They flew in silence for a while, the city sliding beneath them in neat grids of streets and buildings. Liam adjusted their heading slightly, communicating with air traffic control in a voice that was professional and unhurried. He used proper terminology, the kind of language that made it clear he wasn't guessing or improvising. He knew what he was doing, and that realization settled over Chloe like a weight. She swallowed hard and tried again. "You're not just good at this, you're professional." Liam glanced at her briefly, then back at the controls. His face remained neutral. "I do what needs to be done," he said simply. Chloe didn't know what to say to that. She turned her attention back to the window, her mind racing. Who was this man? How had he ended up mopping floors in her building if he could fly like this? The questions piled up in her head, but she didn't ask them. Not now. Not when they were still in the air, and she still needed him to land them safely. She pressed her lips together and stared out at the horizon, trying to ignore the uncomfortable knot forming in her chest. The landing at Skitech's headquarters was flawless. Liam brought the helicopter down onto the private helipad with the kind of precision that made it look effortless. There was no bounce, no sudden drop, just a smooth descent that ended with the skids touching concrete as softly as a breath. Chloe sat frozen for a moment, her hands still gripping the edge of her seat. Her legs felt weak when she finally stepped out onto the helipad, and she wasn't sure if it was from fear or from something else entirely. The CEO of SkiTech was waiting for her near the rooftop entrance, flanked by 2 assistants. He smiled broadly and extended a hand as she approached. "Miss Kensington, right on time. I'm impressed." He glanced past her at the helicopter, where Liam was shutting down the engine. "Your pilot is exceptional. Where did you find him?" Chloe opened her mouth to correct him, to explain that Liam wasn't her pilot, that he was just a janitor who happened to know how to fly. But the words caught in her throat. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the SkiTech CEO was looking at her, with respect and admiration. Or maybe it was the way Liam had just saved her entire career without asking for anything in return. She forced a smile and said, "He's one of a kind." The contract was signed in less than an hour. $50 million, finalized with handshakes and champagne in a conference room that overlooked the city. Chloe should have felt triumphant. She should have felt relief, pride, vindication. But all she could think about was the man waiting on the rooftop, still wearing his janitor's uniform, still holding the keys to a helicopter he had flown like it was second nature. She excused herself as soon as she could and walked back out to the helipad. Liam was standing near the aircraft, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the skyline. He turned when he heard her footsteps. She didn't know what to say. "Thank you" felt inadequate. "I'm sorry" felt too heavy. So she just stood there for a moment, looking at him, trying to read his face. But there was nothing there. No anger, no resentment, no expectation. Just the same composed, watchful gaze he had worn since the moment he stepped forward on her rooftop. Finally, she said, "You saved my career today." Liam nodded once, then said quietly, "We should head back before it gets dark, ma'am." The flight back to Kensington Tower was quieter than the first. Chloe didn't ask any more questions, and Liam didn't offer any more answers. But something had shifted between them, something unspoken and uncomfortable. When they landed, Chloe climbed out of the helicopter and watched as Liam secured the aircraft and walked back toward the stairwell that led down into the building. He picked up the mop he had left, leaning against the railing, and for a moment, it was like nothing had happened. Like he was just the janitor again, invisible and unremarkable. But Chloe couldn't unsee what she had seen. She couldn't unknow what she now knew. He wasn't just a janitor. He was something more. And she had treated him like he was nothing. 2 days passed before Chloe saw Liam again. She had been working late, the way she always did, buried in emails and strategy reports. It was nearly 11 o'clock when she finally left her office and walked down the hallway toward the elevators. The building was mostly empty at that hour. Just the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner somewhere on another floor. She passed the break room on her way to the parking garage and glanced inside out of habit. What she saw made her stop. Liam was sitting at one of the small tables near the window, a half-eaten sandwich in front of him. And curled up on his lap, fast asleep, was a little boy. The child couldn't have been more than 5 years old, his face pressed against Liam's chest, his small hands clutching the front of his father's uniform. A backpack sat on the floor beside them, decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. Liam was scrolling through his phone with one hand, the other resting protectively on the boy's back. Chloe stood in the doorway, frozen. She hadn't known Liam had a son. She hadn't known anything about him at all. Her eyes drifted to the phone in Liam's hand, and she saw the screen clearly from where she stood. The wallpaper was a photo. It showed a younger version of Liam in a military dress uniform, holding a tiny baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Just the two of them. The uniform was formal, the kind worn for ceremonies or official photographs. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the image for a long moment, her mind trying to piece together what she was seeing. Then she turned and walked away before Liam could notice her. Her hands were shaking. A week later, Chloe overheard a conversation that confirmed what she had already started to suspect. She was standing in the hallway outside the security office, waiting for the elevator, when she heard two voices drifting through the open door. One of them belonged to Marcus, the night security guard she had seen in the lobby that morning when all of this started. The other voice was the receptionist from the main lobby. Marcus was saying something about Afghanistan, and Chloe found herself stepping closer, her curiosity overriding her usual sense of propriety. Marcus's voice was low but clear. "You know Liam used to fly Apaches in Afghanistan, right? My cousin served with him. Said he was one of the best pilots in the unit." The receptionist sounded skeptical. "Liam? The janitor?" Marcus laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "Yeah, hard to believe, I know. But his wife died giving birth to their son. He quit everything after that. Just wanted to raise the boy on his own." The receptionist was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's heartbreaking." Marcus agreed. "Yeah, but he's a good man. Doesn't complain. Just does his job and goes home to his kid." Chloe stood in the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She thought about the way she had looked at Liam on the rooftop, the way she had dismissed him, mocked him, treated him like he was invisible. She thought about the laughter from her team, the sarcasm in her voice when she said she would marry him if he could fly the helicopter. And she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. The following week, Chloe found herself reviewing employee records. It was routine work, something her assistant usually handled, but she had insisted on doing it herself this time. She told herself it was because she wanted to personally approve the annual raise requests, but that wasn't the whole truth. She was looking for something. And when she found Liam's file, she opened it slowly, her hands unsteady. The information was sparse but damning. Previous employment, United States Army, warrant officer, 2010 to 2019. Flight hours, 2,847. Commendations, Distinguished Flying Cross. Emergency contact, Finn Walker, son, age 5. Current salary, $32,000 per year. Chloe closed the file and sat back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. She had paid him $32,000 a year to mop floors and empty trash cans. A man who had flown combat missions in Afghanistan. A man who had been decorated for his service. A man who had given up everything to raise his son alone after losing his wife in the most devastating way possible. She felt sick. She didn't know how to fix this. She didn't know if she even could, but she knew she had to try. She found Liam in the parking garage early one morning, just after 6. He was strapping his son into the backseat of an old sedan, the kind that had seen better days but still ran well enough to get from point A to point B. The boy, Finn, was chattering happily about something that had happened at school the day before. Liam was smiling, the first real smile Chloe had ever seen on his face. It made him look younger, softer, more human. She approached carefully, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. Liam looked up, and the smile faded. He straightened and nodded politely. "Morning, ma'am." Chloe didn't know how to start. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head, but now that she was standing in front of him, all the words felt inadequate. She took a breath and said, "Liam, I owe you an apology for what I said on the rooftop, for how I treated you." Liam closed the car door gently, then turned to face her fully. His face was neutral, but there was something guarded in his eyes. "It's all right, ma'am. People see what they expect to see." Chloe shook her head. "No, It's not all right. You saved my career that day, and I treated you like you were nothing." Liam looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I didn't do it for credit. I did it because you needed help." The simplicity of the statement hit her harder than any accusation could have. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Finn's voice piped up from the back seat. "Daddy, is she your boss?" Liam glanced back at his son, and his features softened. "Yes." "Buddy." Finn pressed his face against the window, looking at Chloe with wide, curious eyes. "She's pretty." The comment caught both adults off guard. Liam looked embarrassed, and Chloe felt her cheeks flush. She let out a surprised laugh, the tension breaking just a little. Liam rubbed the back of his neck and said, "Sorry about that." Chloe shook her head, still smiling. "It's fine. He's sweet." She looked at Finn through the window, then back at Liam. "You're a good father," she said softly. Liam's face shifted, something unreadable passing across it. "I try," he said simply. 3 weeks later, the board meeting that changed everything took place. Chloe had been dreading it, though she hadn't said so out loud. Rumors had started circulating through the company about the helicopter flight, about the janitor who had flown the CEO to the most important meeting of her career. Most of the gossip was harmless, curious, rather than malicious. But not all of it. Some people saw it as a liability. Some people saw it as a problem. The board convened in the main conference room on the 42nd floor, and Chloe's father, the chairman, wasted no time getting to the point. He was a tall man with silver hair and a voice that commanded attention. "Chloe, we need to talk about the optics of what happened with Ski Tech." Chloe sat at the head of the table, her hands folded in front of her. "The deal was signed. The contract is solid. I don't see the problem." Her father frowned. "The problem is perception. People are talking. They're saying you let a janitor fly you across the city. It doesn't look good." Davis, the marketing director, leaned forward. "Our brand is built on professionalism and elite service. A janitor flying our CEO sends the wrong message." Rebecca, the CFO, added carefully, "And he's a single black father. The optics are complicated." Chloe felt her jaw tighten. She looked around the table at the faces of people she had worked with for years, people she had trusted. "The optics? He's a decorated veteran. He saved a $50 million deal. What exactly is the problem?" Her father's face hardened. "The problem is association, Chloe. You're the face of this company. We can't afford to be connected to controversy." Chloe wanted to argue. She wanted to tell them they were wrong, that they were being unfair, that Liam deserved better. But she could see the decision had already been made. The board wasn't asking for her opinion. They were telling her how things were going to be. She left the meeting feeling hollow, and when she returned to her office, she found a folded piece of paper on her desk. She recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. It was from Liam. The note was short and to the point. "Thank you for the opportunity. It's time for me to move on." It was signed simply with his name. Chloe stood there, holding the note, and realized with a sinking feeling that Liam had been standing outside the boardroom. He had heard everything, and now he was gone. Chloe read the resignation letter 3 times before she finally let it sink in. The words were polite and professional, the kind of language that gave nothing away. There was no anger in them, no bitterness, just a quiet finality that made her chest ache. She grabbed her phone and called down to security, asking if Liam was still in the building. The answer came back quickly. He had clocked out an hour ago, cleaned out his locker in the basement, and left through the employee entrance. The security guard added, almost as an afterthought, that Liam had mentioned something about a job offer in Tacoma. Chloe sat at her desk, staring at the letter, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Regret. Real regret. Not the kind that came from a missed business opportunity or a failed negotiation, but the kind that came from knowing she had hurt someone who didn't deserve it. She had let her world, with all its rules and expectations and prejudices, push out a man who had done nothing but help her. And now he was gone, and she had no idea how to fix it. The days that followed were strange and hollow. Chloe went through the motions of her job, attended meetings, signed contracts, made decisions. But her mind kept drifting back to Liam. She wondered where he was, if he had found work in Tacoma, if Finn was adjusting to a new school. She wondered if Liam thought about her at all, or if she was just another CEO who had treated him poorly and then forgotten about him. The thought made her feel sick. Nearly 2 months passed in this fog. Summer turned to early fall, and Chloe threw herself into work, trying to bury the guilt that followed her everywhere. Then, one afternoon in late October, she received a phone call that gave her an idea. It was from an event coordinator named Sarah, a woman she had worked with on a few corporate sponsorships over the years. Sarah's voice was stressed and apologetic. "Chloe, I hate to bother you, but we're in a bind. The Veterans Day Air Show is in 3 weeks, and our headliner just canceled. We need a pilot who can fly a demonstration, someone with real skill. I heard a rumor that you know someone exceptional." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. She sat up straighter in her chair. "What kind of demonstration?" Sarah explained that the air show was a major public event held every year along the Seattle waterfront. It drew crowds of over 10,000 people, with media coverage and veterans organizations in attendance. The featured pilot was supposed to fly a vintage Huey helicopter, the kind that had been used during the Vietnam War as a tribute to military aviators. It was a high-profile slot, and the cancellation had left them scrambling. Sarah sounded desperate. "If you know anyone who could do this, it would be a huge help. We can pay, of course, and it's great exposure." Chloe didn't answer right away. Her mind was racing. This was it. This was the chance she had been looking for. The opportunity to do something that mattered. Not for her career, not for her company, but for Liam. She asked Sarah to send over the details, then hung up and stared at her phone for a long moment. She didn't have Liam's number. She had never needed it before. But his file was still on her computer, and buried in the employee records was a contact number listed for emergencies. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen, then typed out a message. "Liam, there's something I need to ask you. Not as your boss, as someone who owes you." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then waited. The response came 2 hours later, just 3 words. "What is it?" Chloe took a breath and typed carefully. She explained about the air show, about the opportunity to fly in front of thousands of people, to be recognized for who he really was. She didn't mention payment, or exposure, or any of the things that might have sounded like she was trying to buy his forgiveness. She just said, she thought he deserved to be seen. The response took longer this time. When it finally came, it was cautious. "Why are you doing this?" Chloe thought about how to answer that, then typed simply, "Because I was wrong, and I want the world to see who you really are." The morning of the Veterans Day Air Show was bright and cold, the kind of November day where the sky was sharp and clear, and the wind off the water cut through jackets like a blade. Chloe arrived at the waterfront early, her stomach twisting with nerves. She had arranged everything: the flight slot, the payment, the credentials. She had even made sure that Liam's name would be announced properly, with his rank and his commendations. But she hadn't seen him yet, and she wasn't sure if he would actually show up. Then she saw him walking through the crowd, and her breath caught. Finn was beside him, holding his hand, wearing a little jacket with patches on the sleeves. Liam looked the same as he always did, composed and deliberate in his movements. But there was something different in his posture now. He wasn't invisible anymore. People were looking at him, veterans in uniform nodding as he passed, a few even stopping to shake his hand. Chloe walked toward them, her heart pounding. Liam saw her and stopped, his face unreadable. Finn looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. Chloe didn't know what to say, so she just said the truth. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Liam looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I almost didn't." She nodded, accepting that. "Why did you?" Liam glanced down at Finn, who was bouncing on his toes with excitement, then back at Chloe. "Because I want my son to see that I'm not ashamed of who I was, or who I am." The words hit her harder than she expected. She swallowed and nodded. "You shouldn't be. You're a hero." Finn tugged on Liam's sleeve, his voice bright and eager. "Daddy's gonna fly." Liam smiled, the kind of smile that softened his whole face and ruffled his son's hair. "Yeah, buddy, I am." Chloe felt something warm and painful in her chest. She looked at Liam and said, "Thank you for giving this a chance." Liam met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something other than guardedness there. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close. "We'll see how it goes," he said. The air show was scheduled to start at noon, and by the time Liam's slot came around, the crowd had swelled to cover the entire waterfront. Chloe stood in the VIP section with Finn beside her, her hands gripping the railing as the vintage Huey helicopter lifted off from the staging area. The sound of the rotor blades was deafening, a deep thrum that vibrated through her chest. Finn was bouncing up and down, pointing at the sky, his voice lost in the noise. Chloe watched as the helicopter climbed higher, then banked sharply to the left. What followed was nothing short of breathtaking. Liam flew the Huey through a series of maneuvers that showcased not just skill, but artistry. He executed loops and rolls with precision, the aircraft moving through the air like it was weightless. The crowd roared with every turn, every dive, every impossible angle. Chloe felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She hadn't known it was possible to fly like that, hadn't known that something so mechanical could look so graceful. And she realized, watching him, that this was who Liam really was. Not the janitor who mopped floors in silence, but the pilot who commanded the sky. When the helicopter finally landed, the applause was thunderous. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, giving Liam's full name and rank, listing his commendations and his years of service. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Liam Walker, United States Army veteran, recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross." The crowd erupted again, and Chloe saw veterans in the audience standing, saluting, some of them wiping tears from their faces. Finn was jumping up and down, shouting, "That's my daddy! That's my daddy!" Liam climbed out of the helicopter and walked toward the crowd, and Chloe could see the shift in him. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just a janitor, just a single father, just a black man people overlooked. He was a pilot. He was a veteran. He was someone who mattered. Media crews swarmed him, reporters shoving microphones in his face, asking questions about his service, his life, his future. But Liam just smiled politely and kept walking, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Finn, and then on Chloe. She met him halfway, Finn running ahead to throw his arms around his father's legs. Liam scooped him up, holding him close, and Finn was laughing and talking a mile a minute about how cool the helicopter was and how everyone was cheering. Chloe stood a few feet away, not sure if she belonged in this moment. But Liam looked at her, and there was something different in his eyes now, something open. He set Finn down gently and took a step toward her. Chloe's voice came out quieter than she intended. "I said something stupid 3 months ago." Liam tilted his head slightly, and there was the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. "You said a lot of stupid things." The comment caught her off guard, and she let out a surprised laugh. The tension that had been coiled in her chest loosened just a little. She nodded, accepting the truth of it. "I did." But I meant one thing in particular. Liam waited, his face curious but patient. Chloe took a breath. I said if you flew the helicopter, I'd marry you. Liam's smile faded, replaced by something more serious. You were joking. Chloe shook her head. I'm not joking anymore. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Chloe did something she had never done in her life. She knelt down, right there on the waterfront, in front of thousands of people and the media cameras that were still recording. The crowd around them went silent, sensing something was happening. Chloe looked up at Liam, her voice steady now, clear and certain. Liam Walker, you are the bravest, most humble, most extraordinary man I've ever met. You taught me to see people, not positions. You taught me what real strength looks like. Will you marry me? The silence stretched, and Chloe's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Liam looked down at her, then at Finn, who was watching with wide eyes. What do you think, buddy? He asked softly. Finn grinned, his voice bright and sure. I like her, Daddy. Liam looked back at Chloe, and this time, the smile that crossed his face was full and genuine, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. Then yes, he said, but only if you promise to see me. All of me. Every day. Chloe felt tears spill over, and she nodded, her voice breaking. I promise. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, and Liam reached down to help her up. When she stood, he pulled her close, and she felt his arms wrap around her, solid and reassuring. Finn squeezed in between them, laughing. And for the first time in months, Chloe felt like she could breathe. 6 months later, the rooftop of Kensington Tower looked different. The helipad was the same. The city skyline still glittered in the distance, but everything else had changed. Liam was now the director of aviation operations, overseeing a fleet of helicopters and a team of pilots. Finn went to a better school, where he thrived and made friends, and still called Chloe Miss Chloe, though he was warming up to the idea of calling her something else. Chloe still worked too much, but she left the office at 5 now, every day, to have dinner with her new family. The company had changed too. The janitorial staff were called the facilities team now, with better pay and better benefits. Chloe had made sure of it. She had learned something important on that rooftop months ago. Something she couldn't unlearn. Every person mattered. Every job had dignity, and no one should ever be invisible. On a warm evening in late spring, Chloe and Liam stood on the rooftop again, the same helicopter waiting nearby. Finn sat in the back seat, buckled in and grinning. Liam was teaching Chloe the basics of flight, his hand over hers on the controls, guiding her movements gently. Finn's voice piped up from the back. Careful, Miss Chloe. Chloe laughed, her nerves giving way to something lighter, something that felt like joy. Liam's voice was low and reassuring beside her. I've got you. She believed him. The helicopter lifted off slowly, rising into the Seattle sky with Liam still guiding the controls through her hands. And as the city fell away beneath them, Chloe felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. The three of them flew together into the sunset, a family built not on perfection, but on respect, on second chances, and on the courage to see people for who they truly are.